Presidential hopeful Miriam Defensor Santiago, the former CID chief and a young reform secretary, is known in public circles as a graftbuster, an eloquent speaker, and a strong-willed leader. According to surveys, she is one of the frontrunners in the race for the highest position in the land, the Philippine presidency. Her vehicular accident a couple of months ago has not stopped this Iron Lady from pursuing her ambition of being the second female president of the Republic. Here are some perceptions of the populace on Miriam Defensor Santiago as a person and on her chances of being president in 1992.
She's a good candidate, but sometimes she speaks too much. What trait do I like about her? She swims with her word. When she says something, she do it.
Miriam Defensor is really intelligent when it comes to on professional level. Magaling siya bilang tulalaban siya ng presidente ng proposal. Magaling siya sa mga activities.
Magaling siya.
Gusto mo ba siya?
Hindi lang ako, pati ang pamilya namin. Kasi si Defensor Santiago. Talino, saka yun din ang inaano ng mga kanya yun, na may gusto ng mga tao ngayon. Okay siya. Wala naman masasabi. Medyo pabura ko na lalabas ko sa eleksyon. Yung gusto ko yung tinitira niyo yung corrupt officials ng mga government natin. Kung may sa isang kabinet ng gobyerno, maging puno siya dyan sa Commission of Immigration and Deportation, siguro kung magiging presidente siya, magiging may sa isang presidente.
Tonight, Attorney Puno looks into the life and presidential ambitions of Miriam Defensor Santiago in this exclusive one-on-one interview. For Viewpoint, this is Rico Luzon reporting.
Good evening, friends, and welcome once again to Viewpoint. Well, what can I say? My one and only guest this evening to discuss a wide range of issues which we hope are going to reveal her thinking about a lot of current events and about how she might act if she were to win as president of this country is Miriam Defensor Santiago. I'm eager to begin this interview. We're going to take this break and be right back. Okay, we're back. Miriam, thank you very much for being with us this evening. I know that you are still not fully recovered from your recent accident. What is the status of your situation right now, your health?
I'm operational. I can function. I resumed my public appearances last July 1, but I cannot observe the same schedule that I had just before the accident.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do in this hour, and it will tend to go very, very fast, as you know, in interviews like this. I know you've been in several interviews, and I would like to try to get away from this perception that this might be a unidimensional candidacy in the sense that you do talk about graft and corruption, and you talk about it very effectively. In fact, you have a book which is called How to Fight Graft, authored by you, and I'd like to show this to our audience because if you want to know how Miriam Defensor Santiago suggests you fight graft, get this book and read it, okay? Because tonight I'd like to see, Miriam, whether we can go over a wider range of issues and get your thinking on a lot of these, and maybe towards the end of the program we'll find it out into some kind of a presidential perspective if you were to be successful in your drive. Okay, so let's go through as many issues as we can. First of all, I'd like to talk about the U.S. bases. Now, as we speak this evening, it looks like the U.S. bases agreement may well be signed very soon, maybe not within the 48 hours that Secretary of Labs apparently said and then denied subsequently, but it looks like lower compensation, crack field out of the discussion, but a longer duration. How does this package strike you?
It's the optimum that can be obtained under the circumstances. There has been a force majeure intervention, an act of God that has precipitated the tempo of the discussions in another direction. So I imagine that is the best we can obtain.
Did we somehow lose in this discussion? Did we miss the boat somehow? A lot of people might feel that this is something that maybe we did not get the best of all possible deals.
Again, that is a possibility. It's very easy to pass judgment on others when one is just in the sidelines. But all the same, you have to consider that very recently the United States President announced he has ordered the closure of about 34 military installations owned by the U.S. government in different parts of the world. And it would have been too much to hope that we could have been an absolute exception to what seems to be a trend in U.S. foreign policy. So I would say that overall, at the end of the day, we can say that we're still fortunate with the terms of this proposed agreement.
Are you happy that the bases are staying even if it's in a very reduced state?
I don't think happiness is an emotion that is appropriate for this topic. I would say that it was predictable as far as I'm concerned. I have taken the position that the basis agreement should be extended for at least 10 years for many reasons, but principal among them in the light of the latest catastrophe involving Mount Pinatubo. The most principal reason of all is that about 500,000 Filipinos will indirectly or directly lose their incomes from the bases if these bases are removed summarily by September 16 this year. And government has taken no serious measures to provide alternative employment opportunities to about 500,000 Filipinos. At the present rate of unemployment in this country, which is running at about 17%, as against the optimum unemployment rate in a developing country, which should only be around 3.5%, we cannot afford to add 500,000 more into the jobless market. And right now, the statistics seem to indicate that out of a workforce of about 27 million Filipinos, 4 million are unemployed. So if we added 500,000 more, the pressure might be intolerable.
Well,
for that reason, I was in favor of extending the agreement.
Angeles City looks like before it had an opportunity to really adopt alternative plans. The aviation complex looks like it's no longer being discussed because it's not possible under the circumstances. But suddenly several, maybe tens of thousands of people in Angeles are out of jobs, and the city itself is going to lose income, and I think some statistics show that it was dependent up to 70% of its gross revenue on the basis either directly or indirectly. What do you think is going to happen to Angeles City, and how are the people there going to precisely avoid this unemployment that you're talking about?
Angeles is a dying city. I've been there almost every weekend, either to visit friends or try to offer very modest assistance on a very reduced scale, considering my mitigated circumstances at present. And there seems to be a very heavy air of desperation in that particular environment. And you mentioned the plans to convert Clark Air Base into an international airport. Even if that plan had not been aborted by the volcanic eruptions, it is good to bear in mind that it would have necessitated a time frame of about 10 years. You can't build an international airport overnight. So whether the volcano had erupted or not, there would have been no plausible scenario that could have been put in place had the Americans left, as they seem to be ready to do at this time.
So it's a difficult situation for the people of Angeles City as well as Pampanga.
That's right. Now, this is very difficult not only because of the departure of the U.S. military presence there, but also because no new businesses can be expected to be established in that area for some time. And apart from that, no tourists can be expected to come either. So, in effect, the lifeblood of the city is drying up.
Okay, let's shift gears pretty rapidly. We'll talk about the assumption of your classmate, Frank Dillon. He was your classmate, was he not?
Yes.
Okay, in UP as executive secretary, and following closely on this will be a number of changes in the cabinet, prominently Defense Secretary Ramos, and then maybe later on, as the secretaries of the cabinet begin to declare their candidacies for one office or another, we are going to have several positions vacant. We have, what is it, maybe less than 11 months to go before the change in the administration. How do you view this continuing rigodon of cabinet positions?
It is here that misery loves company, and since I got kicked out of the cabinet first, ordinarily you'd expect that I should be happy that other people are getting kicked out also. But on the contrary, as a political science student, as a lawyer, as an avid student of political affairs in our country, I can only lament this revolving door policy because, for one, it does not go towards a strengthening of public perception of at the very least, of the stability of the political system.
How would you compare the two executive secretaries, the recently resigned Oka Orgos and Franklin Drilon, in terms of both their style and the perception of their functions as executive secretary?
I don't know them too well. I only read about them in the media, so I have no rational basis for comparing their professional approaches or their management styles. But the obvious difference is that Mr. August does not seem to have denied the fact that when he was executive secretary, he did entertain ambitions. Many believe on a presidential level. And Mr. Drillan, when he assumed office, immediately said that he had set aside his political ambitions. He did not say that he had aborted or completely abandoned them. He simply said that he had set them aside. So if you ask him whether he's running for senator, the answer is not yes or no. He's just saying not for the present.
Will this be a weakness?
Encore in French.
Yeah.
The answer.
Will this be a weakness? You think for Franklin Drillan, if he does not make a definitive answer one way or the other?
Yes, because then people will always suspect that there might be a hidden agenda waiting in the wings.
Okay. If you were to become president, let me ask you what you think your executive secretary should be. We've had several styles already. We've had the administrator, but politically, probably not particularly caring about political matters, Makaray. We had a very, very protective executive secretary in the form of Joe Carvalho. We had a very popular, but according to some, not very administratively inclined Oscar Orbos. I mean, with that kind of difference in the approaches to executive secretaries, how would you want an executive secretary to serve you?
In the event, hypothetically speaking, my executive secretary would be invisible. In fact, he wouldn't exist because I will not have an executive secretary. I don't see a rationale for another additional member of the cabinet for the sole purpose of waiting hand and foot on the president. The president is the chief executive. He is the head of the administrative system. I intend, therefore, to be my own executive secretary. I will have, however, a chief of staff, just so that he can rationalize the paper flow.
So you don't believe in little presidents?
Oh no, because I believe that this creates a vacuum in the locus or in the center of power, and politics like nature abhors a vacuum. Multifarious forces will immediately try to rush in and fill the vacuum. I think that is what is happening in Malacanang at this time.
Cabinet secretaries, there has been one, you said you're very interested in political science. One of the schools of thought that in the style of the President Aquino is that many of the cabinet secretaries have been given too much of their own head, as it were, of their own directions, as it were, and as if they were proceeding on paths quite different from what the President had set, or maybe the President just gave them that much freedom. How do you assess that kind of performance in terms of the cabinet, and how would you do it differently if you would do it differently?
Yes, I'm under the impression that occasionally during this 6-year administration, the executive secretary has been marching to the beat of a different drummer, not necessarily to the tempo set by his own chief executive. If I were president, as I said, I wouldn't have an executive secretary, but I would have subordinates performing administrative tasks immediately under my command. And if so, these assistants, as I did when I was in CID or in the DAR, would have to, first of all, they would have to receive from me a specific set of guidelines on what the limits and the ceilings of their authorities are. I have to set the parameters immediately. That way there will be no confusion and there will be no attempts to arrogate power that has never been placed within their jurisdiction.
I think I know the answer when I saw you shooting your gun there on the firing range and wielding your sword. But what if they step out of line?
Well, as that's a rhetorical question. I will probably commit homicide.
Okay, we'll take this break. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and we're talking to Miriam, Defensor, Santiago. And Miriam, let me just pick up on that. Of course, you were joking when you said that you would commit homicide. But there is a lot of public outrage on things that are going on right now, particularly with the peace and order situation of this country. I mean, there are very highly publicized cases, like the Visconde case. You've got that Chapman case. But a lot of people also know that there are a lot of cases that do not go reported. I mean, almost every day you hear maybe from friends, or your own friends, my own friends, about crimes that they witnessed, but they can't do anything about it. And for them, it's not useful to make any kind of reporting on these particular incidents. Number one, what is your view, your reading of the perception of people on the peace and order situation right now?
I think they have reached a point almost of despair, not only of helplessness, but of desperation. And there is a feeling of resignation to the situation, which is even more dangerous, in the sense that they don't believe that even if they file complaints in court, that the judicial system will address their grievances. So I consider that this is a highly combustible situation.
Is that going to be one of the issues you think you will raise in the heat of the campaign? That particular question?
The breakdown of law and order and of the judicial system itself, yes, although that today it is not central to the consciousness of the public, because economic concerns are the focus of today's agitation.
Okay, we talk about economic concerns a little while. Let me bring you to this debate on the death penalty. There have been a lot of proposals that we now reimpose the death penalty because people feel that as the Constitution mandates, there are compelling reasons and there are heinous crimes being committed right now. Would you be in favor of reinstating the death penalty?
As a lawyer and as a former trial judge, I've always been a very strong law and order person. And after 5 years sitting in the regional trial court of Quezon City, I reached the conclusion that no matter what you might say in theory about the deterrent effect of the death penalty, in practice it does deter the criminal. It has a very strong persuasive effect on the criminal whenever the judge adverts to the death penalty on the bench.
Some of the senators who oppose it claim that there are statistics based, of course, on Western countries and the United States, which do not show that the death penalty is a deterrent. How do you react to that?
Yes, the political science students are familiar with this argument because resolve that the death penalty should be abolished or should be restored is always a classic debate topic in all political science classes. But the thing is this, no statistics anywhere in the world can ever prove convincingly that the death penalty does not have a deterrent effect for the simple reason that these statistics are not available.
That's right.
You can't quantify the mind of a person. You can't have statisticians knocking on doors and saying, did you wish to murder or rape someone except that you were afraid you were going to be electric?
What about those who say that first, before we reinstitute the death penalty, we should first run such a survey here in the Philippines and see how the statistics develop? Because the criticism is that all right, there are no statistics based on the Philippine experience. Let's try it. Let's see whether there will be some kind of an opinion survey or some kind of hard data which shows one or the other conclusion. Should we first have that kind of a survey?
This is the empirical approach. The lawyers call this the approach of the Brandeis brief, because Justice Brandeis of the U.S. Supreme Court never reviewed a case unless he could cite data and figures and statistics. But I doubt very much if we can quantify the problem. This is not just a mere sociological problem that statistics will effectively dispose of. This is a political phenomenon at the same time. And I don't believe you can calibrate the problem by using a statistical approach.
What about the argument that in any kind of system like that, it is always the poor, the disadvantaged, those that cannot have access to smart lawyers and do not have contacts with the judicial system that get punished, that bear the brunt of this kind of penalty?
That may be true, but in my experience in the regional trial court, much will depend on the competence of the judge. If the judge is intent on discharging his proper functions, which is to administer justice with an even hand, and we know that the scales are not balanced because the one litigant on the one hand belongs to a rich family and can therefore afford all the amenities of the judicial system that money can buy, and on the other hand, the opponent or the adversary, the other litigant, is a poor man who will have to depend on public charity in order to defend himself. If the judge were fully conscious of his judicial functions, which is to balance the scales of justice, nonetheless, that effect that some Cassandras of doom predict will not take place.
When you were a judge, did you have an occasion to impose a death penalty on any of the
No, although I was willing to, for the simple reason that no case before me for 5 years ever presented the full configuration of qualifying or aggravating circumstances that would have justified the imposition of the death penalty. I remember that I imposed life sentences. Several times, on several accused, I may have imposed the death penalty 2 or 3 times, as mandated by law. But I wasn't able to impose the death penalty, not because of any unwillingness, but simply because the legal qualifications had not been met.
Okay, now, another controversial subject, revolving ban, which is due to start this Thursday, and if it escalates, then it begins to be a much bigger problem than had been initially anticipated. Let's talk about the central issues first behind the revolving ban. The rollback in oil prices and the question of the import levy reduction. Number one, do you think that the fuel prices should be reduced or even rolled back to December 1990 levels?
I advocate and I support the proposition that they should be at least reduced. Today's newspapers carry the headline that the administration, the president, might consent to a 3 peso per liter reduction, whereas the ralliers propose that it should not be less than 5, so apparently the gap is closing. At first, the government took the hard line that it would not grant any reduction whatsoever. So apparently, both the demonstrators and the administration are now in the process of finding a confluence of thought. So apparently, even society in general no longer opposes a proposed reduction, and I am one of those who are in favor of the reduction.
The theory, of course, in opposing a reduction is that we don't have the resources. No? Number one, we have the APS fund, aside from the fact that it has to be, the deficit to the APSF has to be completely erased. There was a point of view at one time that it also had to work up a surplus so that we could use that for other purposes, of course, with proper legislative authorization. But in doing that, a lot of people say that we are prolonging the suffering of a lot of our people. Now, where would you come down with that kind of an argument? Some people say, and this is probably a matter of policy which you as president will have to face, it's a classic confrontation between populist ideas, no? and hard economic facts, which your economic advisors might tell you is the right thing to do. Your political advisors would tell you, well, that's not the popular thing to do. Where would you come down if that kind of a conflict ever hit you as president?
The OPSF deficit would have been wiped out in any event in the very near future. Some say it would have been wiped out by July 22. The administration says between August 10 and August 15. So we don't have the deficit to contend with anymore. The government by that time would have gotten back on its feet. The question now is, do we want to continue with the OPSF? In effect, this fund is a subsidy. And in the long run, a subsidy is always expensive to the ultimate end user or the consumer. And my position in general is that I am opposed to any subsidy, just as I am opposed to monopolies in general. I am therefore in favor of scrapping the oil price stabilization fund because it is a subsidy. Now, if the argument is that the OPSF should be used to fund other activities instead of simply acting as a buffer against escalating or de-escalating oil prices, my answer is this. During the Marcos administration, we harshly criticized that gentleman because he used the term to save the republic and reform society as a catch-all phrase for instituting all manner of activities. Some people say outside the perimeters of the Constitution at that time. Now, in effect, this is what some economists want to do with the term oil price stabilization fund. They want to use it as a catch-all economic panacea for everything, for raising funds for purposes that have no connection, direct or indirect, with oil products. So I say, if you want to raise funds for certain purposes, call it by its proper name. Don't do it to an oil price stabilization fund.
What would you substitute the OPSF fund for if you were to completely remove it? Well, the purpose of that is precisely to try to cushion the effects of variations in the encyclical movements, for example, in oil prices all over the world due to several factors. But what would you do, if anything, to substitute it so that we would get insulated from that kind of up and down, or would you be in favor of a total deregulation of oil prices?
The latter. In the ultimate future, we still have to bite the bullet. With the OPSF, we're simply postponing and sometimes aggravating a problem. So I say, since we have a free enterprise economy, let the free market dictate the price of oil. It is not the function of government to manipulate free market forces.
Then you would really hit that question I asked earlier, populism versus hard economic data, because some people have asked whether we have the political will to allow that sort of thing to happen, because the oil companies, depending on situations happening outside of their control, essentially, might be adjusting prices up and down. So, I mean, would we be prepared for that kind of...
We would if we had a leader who is strong, decisive, and visionary. If he can explain why a sacrifice is necessary, and even more importantly, if that leader has credibility, he will not have difficulty leading the Filipino people, because we are not a nation of imbeciles. We are now one of Asia's most literate countries. But the problem is that today there is almost total lack of credibility in government.
What about the argument that that kind of policy would just again put all of the hardship on those that can least afford it? Because if the oil companies were able to make a case for a very high oil price, depending on developments abroad, then the immediate effects on that, for example, the whole thing about diesel prices, no? If it turns out that had to be jacked up very high, then all the GP drivers and all of the public utility operators would scream. What would you say in a kind of a situation like that?
Now, that kind of question would be purism. It would be a valid question if we were treating this economic matter in a vacuum, all by itself. But the economy is never a simple matter to unravel. It always has a ripple effect on many other facets of society. So remember that if we were to deregulate the price of oil, we would have taken simultaneously many other economic measures, and the total effect at the end of the day would have been to cushion the consumer against wild swings in the market, whether it concerns oil or any other product.
So in other words, you're saying that things can be done to kind of prepare for eventualities such as that?
Exactly, yes. If we had a forward-looking economic strategies at the helm of government, there need be no fear about the unknown.
Which we do not have now?
Well, let me just say that the President has been more concerned with political concerns, particularly with the reinstitution of democratic systems, rather than with the economic agenda. And by now, there is not enough time. She only has 11 months left.
Okay, we'll continue to pick the brain. So from here to Defensor, Santiago, when we come back from this break. Okay, we're back. Miriam, we're getting closer to discussing really political issues now. Let me start on this. One of the big $64,000 questions right now is whether President Aquino is going to run in 1992. We'll talk about that in a little while, but let me ask the legal question, because you're a lawyer, you've been a judge, and you are very familiar with all these issues. There is, of course, a constitutional question about whether President Aquino can run in 1992. From a purely legal point of view, what is your opinion on whether she can, whether the constitutional prohibition applies to her?
That concerns Article 7 of the Constitution. There is a specific declaration: the President shall not be eligible for any re-election. Because of the word any, the President shall not be eligible for any re-election. Apparently, those who oppose a re-election for President Aquino argue that whether the President was elected under regular elections, which are contemplated for May 1992 by our Constitution, or whether she was elected by in elections before the regular elections. All the things is covered by the prohibition. I would say that since there is a doubt, in my case, I would be perfectly willing to resolve the doubt in favor of the President.
What about the argument that when the Constitution refers to the President, they were not referring to this President, but to future Presidents under the 87 Constitution? Does that hold water from a purely legal point of view?
Yes, that's possible. This is a genuine gray area of the Constitution, and only the Supreme Court can say with finality. Now, for me, the problem would be ethical. If I were a sitting President, if I were the incumbent President, and there was a legitimate doubt on my capability, on my qualification for re-election, which has to be settled by the Supreme Court, I would prefer for the Supreme Court not to resolve the issue at all. Because if the Supreme Court resolves the issue in a negative way, it places the President in an embarrassing position. I would rather unilaterally renounce my rights, if any, under the Constitution.
You're saying from a purely legal point of view, there may be a basis for her to run.
That's right.
But from an ethical point of view, you would suggest that she not do it.
If I were in her place.
Okay. Well, she said so for about, what is it now? What's the last count? About 82, 83? But she was not going to run. Well, maybe we can take her word for it, because she said that again when OCA was resigned. Now, let's move into that. You are very visible in terms of your campaign. One of the little needles that have been pushed towards you, in fact, was this thing about your office in the Guadalupe area. There's this big office in Miriam, Defensor, Santiago, what is that, offices or something? Some people are saying you're jumping the gun on the campaign. What is your response to that?
Oh, yes. I studied that. I read the election code, and apparently the election code prohibits any activity that is designed to convince the public to vote for a certain person for a certain profession. And I wanted to publicize, naturally, like any other professional, the office. Yet you remember, since you also belong to the same profession, since we are both lawyers, that we are bound by the legal code of ethics. We are strictly prohibited from advertising our offices. So I couldn't write the name of the law office on the facade of the building for the simple reason that it would violate the legal code of ethics. But we did want people to be able to find the office readily. So, and because they associate it with me, in fact the law office carries my name, there was no other choice. And I don't believe that there is any violation of the election code or any other legal code.
But is that a campaign headquarters or is it a law office?
Well, it is what it says. It holds all the offices with which I'm connected. So the facade says Miriam, Defensor, Santiago offices, and then part of the wall lists all the offices. The first is the Miriam, Defensor, Santiago Associates Law Office. The second is the People's Reform Party. The third is the Movement for Responsible Public Service, or MOVERS. And the fourth is a trading company, which we are just establishing, called Lexus Trading Company.
But you really hold offices there?
Yes, I do.
You have, there's a law office there and everything?
Yes, of course.
All right, okay. Now, surveys. We're talking about surveys. The surveys are uniform, and as we were talking about this in the break, they seem to be consistent, because you are always within the first 3 or 4 whenever it comes to recognition and the question of whether you are would win in any kind of electoral exercise at this point. How do you read this? I mean, some people, after all of this time, and you've been at this now for how long, Miriam? It's been over a year, hasn't it?
That's right.
Okay, after all of this time, you certainly have not made no secret about what you're after. Some people keep saying that the surveys don't translate to votes because what is important is an organization. Yet you come out without any kind of organization, if that's what they're saying, and these surveys are being taken at random with certain samplings which are supposed to be scientifically designed. You come out finishing very well. Number one, what is your response to those that say that those results of the surveys cannot be translated into actual votes come election day?
That is wishful thinking, because they do not rate high in the surveys. They vocally express the hope and the ardent desire that those of the people really want, the truly popular figures, and I'm not referring to myself alone, but to those whom you said score maybe the first 4 or first 5 in these surveys. They ardently hope that the people indicated by the electorate to be popular will not win. That is their ardent wish. And apparently, by saying this, they are conditioning the minds of the public to the bribery and the terrorism that they are prepared to commit. For these people are even now flaunting in public their capacity to buy votes. They are saying we've got 1 billion, 2 billion, 28 billion pesos, which is the estimated expenditures that the previous administration said to have spent in the last presidential election. Or they're saying we've got the machinery. Now what is the implication of this statement? There's deprecatory statement that a person can be popular but can never be elected because this person does not have money and does not have an organization. This is a direct insult to the democratic system under which we all propose to live. For what is basically a democratic form of government? A government where the people elect those who shall be the governors. Now, the presidential surveys, although an unofficial status, at least for those that are accepted to be objective, all the major presidential surveys consistently name certain individuals as top-notchers, to be 4 or 5 of these presidentiable. If that is the case, we now know whom the people want to become president. And yet, certain presidential candidates have the effrontery to claim that notwithstanding this very clear message from the Filipino people, nonetheless, the individuals whom the people have indicated to be closest to their hearts should not be allowed to take office for the simple reason that they don't have money to use to buy votes and they don't have